Good evening, YouTube audience, IG audience. Glad to be here on this amazing Saturday, going into Sunday, December 28th, starting on Saturday, December 27th. My name is Dr. Rome Fraser, and let me show. Um, there we go. Okay, uh, showing the full. Yes, thank you. Glad to be here on this Sunday morning, December 20th. It took me a while to like get ready and prepare. It's my first live in about a minute, over a minute, a few minutes, but I'm glad to be back. I've been reading, burying my head in the ground, focusing on my projects. One of them is the work of a playwright who I'm working on finishing next year. We'll see when that's out. But right now, what I want to do is spend at least 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes talking about the work of an important writer, Nicholas Boggs. I finished the first half of his book, Baldwin, A Love Story, and it's quite an interesting experience I had. Um, took a few pauses, but definitely took notes. And it's a powerful biography. I think Boggs does a good job of providing a history of Baldwin's life in the context of his work. That's what makes it compelling to read, that he uh, truly writes his experience, Baldwin's experience, in the context of his work, elements of his life that show up in his fiction, in his first novel, um, Go Tell It on the Mountain, to his second novel, Giovanni's Room. And that's where the biography second chapter ends. It's four basic chapters, sections. Um, and each section is devoted to a significant person in Baldwin's love life, not necessarily sexual. The first one was more of a platonic love, and it's called Book One. Boggs names his first book, Book One, Buford. The Greenwich Village years, 1940 to 1948. Um, and so I just want to look at uh, key parts of that first book. But before you start with the books, what Boggs has, he has Book One, Buford, Book Two, Lucian, and then he has an interlude. And I just want to end this particular discussion with the interlude and points, strong points Boggs makes. In the interlude seems to be Baldwin's, because he's at this time in the story, he's doing a strictly chronological look. Boggs is, according to the important people in Baldwin's life, James Baldwin's life. And the interlude is more what happens to Baldwin after he leaves Europe and comes back to America to deal with what is happening. If he's in his 30s around this time, he was born in 24. Um, these years that he's in his 30s dealing with America is like 1950s, mid 1950s. So the interlude is dealing with Baldwin's trip to the South. He takes a trip um, to Charlotte and to Montgomery, um, and then to Birmingham. Um, and he writes about what he sees. And Boggs states exactly where um, we see what Baldwin has observed in the books, in the specific books Baldwin wrote. I like the way Boggs begins the biography with the prologue, and I wanted to look at that, particularly the way no, 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 no. Okay. I just want to make sure I press the right thing. It's been a while. I got to make sure I press the right buttons since I haven't pressed them in a while. But this is the last page of Boggs's prologue. It's page 21. Um, he's explaining, and the reason this part is compelling is because I read this specific essay that Boggs mentions. It's an essay Baldwin wrote in 85 called Freaks in the American Ideal of Manhood. And I remember when I was a freshman Actually, it was more when I was a sophomore and junior at Yale College, and the Library of America had just published Baldwin's nonfiction collection. And one of the essays that just slapped me in the face that I read over and over that really made me um, be forced to confront my homosexuality was Baldwin's essay called Freaks in the American Ideal of Manhood. And how the way he wrote that, I was so emphatic about that essay, it wasn't even funny. I would make copies of it and give to my friends. This was when I was a junior. So this had to be 99, 2000. And that that essay was in the Library of America collection that I bought. And I remember making copies of it and passing it out to my friends and telling them, you got to read this. So in Boggs's prologue, the last page of his prologue, he writes that in that same 1985 essay, Freaks in the American Ideal of Manhood, in which Baldwin briefly recalled his experience with a stranger in the stairwell, he would also offer a summary of the importance of the relationship he developed with the man who had followed him into the church that night, whose name was Billy. This Harlem racketeer, a man of about 38, fell in love with me, and I will be grateful to that man until the day I die, he would write, explaining how he shared his poetry with him because there wasn't anybody else in his Harlem neighborhood to show it to. He then wonders what on earth his friends could have been thinking confronted with stingy, brimmed mustache, razor toting Papa and skinny, pop-eyed me when he walked me into various shady joints. I drinking ginger ale, he drinking brandy. I think I was supposed to be his nephew, some nonsense like that, though he was Spanish and Irish with curly black hair. But I knew he was showing me off and wanted his friends to be happy for him, which indeed, if the way they treated me can be taken as a barometer, they were. They seemed to feel that this was his business, that he would be in trouble if it became their business. So he talks about this protection he felt, from older men. And the beginning of the first book is called Buford, and it's named after Buford Delaney, a artist that some of Baldwin's classmates at DeWitt Clinton High School went to. Baldwin went to DeWitt Clinton High School, and a lot of his classmates, I believe the one that introduced him to Buford was Emile, who was a painter in Greenwich Village. I want to get this right. Uh, but so if we look at the next page that I found striking at to stage, that's this one. Yes, this describes their common interests. One of the reasons Buford was became a close friend and Baldwin regarding him so highly was their shared love for music. Boggs writes or quotes Baldwin, I had grown up with music, Baldwin would write, by which he meant church music, but now on Buford's small black record player, I began to hear what I had never dared or been able to hear. Louis Armstrong, Bessie Smith, Ella Fitzgerald, and Fats Waller. Um, and this is a touching part because this shows like that very strictly platonic relationship, even though which Boggs considers a love relationship, one of the four that Boggs focuses on. The second half on the next page, 29, Boggs writes, almost miraculously, it seemed Baldwin had found in Buford, as he would put it, walking, living proof for me that a black man could be an artist. So Boggs makes clear the powerful inspirational role Buford Delaney played in Baldwin's life. Also born into a religious household with many siblings, like Baldwin was. In his case, in Knoxville, Tennessee. Knoxville is also the birthplace, I believe, where Nikki Giovanni, the Gemini, grew up. Buford had found a way to pursue his ambitions as a painter by making his way to Boston and then to New York City. So you really see that powerful relationship he had. Later in this book, um, Boggs describes a article, a short story that Baldwin writes for his school newspaper called The Magpie. And the name of the short story is Incident in London. And the way that Boggs describes this, he quotes from the story saying, long before when the man was young, and before he had gone off to the many wars that were always being fought, and he had seen how strife degraded and destroyed humanity. I underline at this part his faith. You can barely see it. You can't see it in this particular, but under that line, the last line, the very bottom line, is a line that says, it's Baldwin's short story from Incident in London, where Baldwin writes, his faith had lost its glory and disappeared, but now another war had come. And I just felt like while reading this, Boggs conflated Baldwin with the character he's writing about. I don't think Baldwin himself lost faith in the church. I think the character really had to, in order for him to explore, to see if um, there is any reckoning, because later in his life we see Baldwin never ever actually left his faith. Another key part of this book one, I want to make sure I get the important parts that I highlighted. Um, his relationship with Buford Delaney. I am also looking for, let me see this. I want to get the page right. 32. Yeah, page 32 I thought was well written. No, no, no. That's the part I just left. Let me get my pages aligned. It's 49 actually. So in this particular part, he um, describes his Greenwich Village years where Buford Delaney lived in Greenwich Village. And the part I've underlined here says Baldwin was beginning to understand that the term faggot was created out of the insecurity and self hatred of presumptively straight men. This is something that's also mentioned by Ta-Nehisi Coates in his work Between the World and Me, and how people create that term, particularly straight men, to just make outsiders of people, to turn them into outsiders, to turn them into outcasts. And Baldwin saw early that that word, that epithet, that name, faggot, intended to really isolate and turn homosexual people into the other, into the unknown, into the dangerous, into the enemy of all people by using that slur. It was created out of the insecurity. Later in that next paragraph, Boggs writes that Baldwin was in fact primarily who did not appear stereotypically homosexual or queer, but who also often had wives or girlfriends. And I thought this part was so powerful because it reminded me of the interview I saw of Nicholas Boggs when he spoke at the CUNY Graduate Center with John McWhorter. And one of the things that the two of them brought up was that that's part of the desire that when you look at the men that Baldwin desired, although they were men, of course, part of what the desire included was the fact that they were married. And Boggs suggested that Baldwin, almost in a sort of way, liked his involved men that he involved himself with to be married, so that there's that emotional distance. And I just found that so fascinating as a homosexual myself, who, if I find out I'm dating a married man, I'll run like the plague, as far as the East is from the West, because I'm the kind of person that can't be loved, in sections or in fractions or in pieces or in breadcrumbs. So the fact that this bold writer, Baldwin, um, preferred, in fact, men who were already in relationships was daunting to me, surprising, dare I say, disappointing. While reading, I'm like, how can somebody who writes so boldly against racism not want to love boldly? And for me, in my mind, the only way to love boldly is to love somebody who's able to give all of you, and you're able to give all of yourself to them, not somebody who already in a relationship. But that made Baldwin very intriguing. And you see, I could tell that theme comes up with other lovers that he has, particularly Lucien. And so, and he has what I call, what I would describe, and I know now because I have the vocabulary to describe it now, um, what I would identify as a karmic bond between a young man named Arthur, who's also like him from New York. He's a very the first big lover after Lucian, and but you see, he also is distracted because he is dead set on fulfilling his goal of being a successful artist, just like Baldwin. And I like the way Boggs relates Baldwin's story, Sonny's Blues, to the role of Arthur in his life, because that was a tumultuous relationship, and it was not allowing him. I didn't even know about it until I'm reading this book, and you really see how um, whoever a person dates reflects the values of that person. So if they're going to, Arnold is his name. I said, yeah, I said Arthur. I'm sorry. The name of the lover was not Arthur. The name of the lover was Arnold. Arnold. I want to make sure I get that right. Arnold. Arnold came after Lucian and uh, had a lot of similarities, but it was a tumultuous relationship. He was much younger than Baldwin, and clearly they could not help each other grow. And so Baldwin had to let him go, but he did so reluctantly in his 30s. Um, and so this search for love made Baldwin, the way that Boggs writes him, very sympathetic, very, very sympathetic. I'm still taking my time to really process. Um, and the interlude is heavy because he's confronted with the reality of Jim Crow America and how he's got a right to it, and he's got to write to the situation, write the fiction, write the nonfiction, write the plays. And when I was in college, I performed James Baldwin's play, Blues for Mr. Charlie. I played the father character of the main character. Meridian Henry is the father of Richard Henry, who was loosely based on Medgar Evers' composite of Medgar Evers and Emmett Till. Emmett Till was lynched essentially 2 years before Baldwin is like going down south. Um, and the way that Boggs writes it, it's like this urgency. Baldwin, has this urgency to explain, be in a sort of way a Negro whisperer to his audience. Wanted to look at this next part. What I'm writing here in the margin of Boggs' analysis is that I believe this was the best part. Now I'm in book two. Book two is called The Lucian Years, um, which Boggs says is from 1948 to 1955. Um, I appreciate how Boggs writes of Baldwin's relationship with Richard Wright because Richard Wright was the famous writer that made it to France before him, and how that controversial essay Baldwin wrote called Everybody's Protest Novel really put a serious wedge between Baldwin and Wright. On this page here, Boggs writes, despite the clearly personal nature of these words that Baldwin wrote, the rift between the two men has often been framed in resolutely generational or aesthetic terms, with the full scope of the subtext behind their differences, both emotional and political, rarely getting its due. One popular view was that Baldwin knew and exploited the fact that white America would allow only one famous Black author. And that reminded me of an interview Paul Marshall gave, who's another incredible novelist, who essentially said the same thing regarding Black women novelists, that America will only allow one novelist at a time to be famous. And she's really referring to Toni Morrison, and how it never really made room for a second prominent novelists. And Boggs here is making the case, and I think I really trusted him to when I read that. I really trusted his voice, his analysis, especially with also the way that he describes Baldwin's experiences in terms of the fiction that Baldwin writes. It reminds me of what Mary Graham did with Margaret Walker in describing Margaret Walker's life in terms of her fiction and the difference Walker was drawing between her main character Virey and Scarlett O'Hara, and how popular that character was, and beloved that character was, is how beloved her character Virey should also be, which was Margaret Walker's point. So that is this point that he makes really allowed me to trust him. This is also in book one, the Lucian years. I wanted to go to the next point now. I'm seeing which one this is. Okay. My iPhone, where it was. I'm working with it. I did go to and I got a correct, so I'm working on it so I don't have to do so many numerous words that are super small right now. I just want to be clear. Okay. Okay. This is a powerful part where Boggs begins to describe the inspiration for Baldwin's second novel, Giovanni's Room. And I was hoping Boggs would quote an amazing critic of Baldwin's work, who I remember reading when I was in grad school, Aliyah Abdur Rahman, wrote an incredible essay of Giovanni's Room, but he didn't quote her. He does his own criticism, Boggs does. But I was very impressed with the parallels Boggs was drawing between Baldwin's real life in the middle of the 1950s and the story of his novel, his fictional novel, Giovanni's Room, that's basically on a love triangle in his own real life. Um, and based on Baldwin's own real life, is what the story of Giovanni's Room is. Boggs writes, here in the south of France, it does not often snow. The narrator David observes midway through Giovanni's Room. But snowflakes in the beginning, rather gently. We're going into winter 2026, entering the Capricorn season. Winter started about what, 6 days ago now. Um, Boggs writes that he quotes from Giovanni's Room. Rather gently and now with more force have been falling for the last half hour. It falls as though it might quickly turn into a blizzard. Much like Baldwin, who began writing the novel in the shadow of Jacques' departure and Baldwin's loss of Lucienne, David is alone in a rented farmhouse in Grasse, recovering from two failed love affairs with his ex-fiancée, Hella, who has recently left him to return to America, and with his secret love, Giovanni, who has now been sentenced to death after the murder of Guillaume. Uh, and so it becomes, and so that's how it begins. And then you find out how, throughout the course of the novel, they get to that place. And the whole message, which Boggs makes clear, and I think Boggs does an awesome job of driving home the whole point of Giovanni's Room, and that is to show how David was not willing to love. And Boggs draws the similarity between David not being willing to love Giovanni to, um, he draws that similarity to Lucian not being able to love James Baldwin, young James. And so you really see the connections clearly. Um, it's a powerful novel. I think the most powerful part of Giovanni's Room for me personally was the end and how the newspaper headline really skewed the reality of what the reader, the observer, knew what really happened, which speaks to the misinterpretation that so often occurs regarding two men loving each other, and how that's the final one and there's no correction. That's what really got me at the end. It's like how can the headlines say that when that's not what happened? Um, to Giovanni, in terms of um, his behavior and his motives. What struck me about, and Boggs didn't write this, but he does capture the unrequited love, which is the theme in Baldwin's real life, what he was hoping to have. But Lucien, since meeting him, Boggs has made clear, has already gone on. He sleeps with women. He has conceived a child. He has his own family. He has a separate life. But as I mentioned earlier, those are characteristics of men that Baldwin actually prefer for them to already be involved. So you can't be too invested, even though still Baldwin wanted Lucien to stay. So check out this book. Give this book an opportunity. Learn about the power of platonic love that we get in that first part from Baldwin's relationship with Buford, and the second part where we learn about Baldwin's emerging identity as an artist. He got a lot of pressure to repeat in the second novel, Baldwin did, what Baldwin did in the first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain. So Abdur Rahman also makes this clear that his audiences wanted. David Leeming also makes this clear. Doesn't make it as clear as Leeming and Abdur Rahman that his black audience wanted him to write a sequel or a novel like Go Tell It on the Mountain. It's set in the United States South, focuses on the Great Migration and what happens to a black family that has moved up north. And so there was an expectation for publishers alike and his audience alike to read a story like Go Tell It on the Mountain. But he does not write that story. His second novel has nothing to do with the American South. It has everything to do with uh, Europe and Giovanni the Italian falling in love with the white American David. And when the going gets tough for David and the relationship grows and gets more serious, David can't handle it. And so Boggs makes a good point about how um, Baldwin is representing white masculinity and white heteronormativity in the character of David and how they become a prison for him. And, and they're an example of what Baldwin said about men becoming dangerous when you are unable to love. When a man is unable to love, he is dangerous. And that is why what happens in the novel happens. Um, wanted to speak to, okay, I have about 2 more minutes. I wanted to speak to two more parts to this first part and then conclude. Um, this part is, let me see, I want to get the page number correct and tell you the correct page number, 140. I'm going to make sure, no, this has to be 176. Yes, it is. So at the end of the first part, at the end of part two, Lucian years, Baldwin faces a lot of resistance when he first publishes Giovanni's Room. This last paragraph that I've written notes under says, and this is Boggs writing, when he, Baldwin, boarded a ship bound for France at the end of September, Baldwin was dismayed but undaunted. Oh, I wanted to read the earlier paragraph. Um, this is the initial response, Boggs writes, of Giovanni's Room. And I want to start with the sentence that says, unfortunately. Unfortunately, Bill Cole at Knopf was on vacation, and the pages went directly to his editor, Philip Vaudrin, who shared it with some other editors. This is the part that got me. They found the homosexual themes repugnant. One of the editors recalled, and apparently Alfred Knopf himself was the one to reject the manuscript outright. I was told to bear in mind that I was a young Negro writer. This is what I underline here. The first full sentence I underline on this page, page 176. I was a young Negro writer with a certain audience, and I wasn't supposed to alienate that audience. And he just totally dismisses this until Dial, Boggs later writes, Dial chooses to publish Giovanni's Room, despite so many people, including the editors and the audience, having an issue with him writing about homosexual themes. Every writer writes about what they know, and Baldwin does just that. This is the last page of the interlude. He visits the South, witnesses Jim Crow. I was glad to read he and Fred Shuttlesworth were able to have a conversation in Alabama because Shuttlesworth was absolutely instrumental organizer. Um, and I was grateful to be a benefit be a beneficiary of the work that Shuttlesworth did. But what's deep about this part here, this last section of the interlude, this page that I'm looking at is page 230. And what Boggs writes is that after visiting the South, this sentence where I underline the word collapsed, unable to yet face his family and closer friends, he, Baldwin, collapsed in that home of an acquaintance, sorry, known only as Furneaux, at his apartment at 28 Bond Street. There he wrote, reliving my trip. He surrendered to my nightmares and, as far as the city was concerned, vanished. He spent 5 days nearly catatonic as his family and friends searched for him in every street and bar and almost called the police. Um, and this is after seeing the Jim Crow talking to a young man who was integrating a segregated high school in Charlotte. Um, so this was quite a grueling introduction to Jim Crow. And I'm grateful for the detail that Nicholas Boggs gives us in Baldwin, A Love Story. So I plan to absolutely finish this book, and I highly recommend those listening to check it out. It's called Baldwin, A Love Story. If you appreciated this first half review, bless my Cash App. I won't be mad at you. It's $ Roan Fraser. And I, of course, am the author of To a More Positive Purpose, Critical Responses to the Scholarship of Tony Martin, which you can buy on Amazon. Keep reading and keep the faith.